The only one we have. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Friday, June 21st, and the time is 10:30 a.m. A quorum is present. All four board members are present. The meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting was posted as required by law. And we are going to start with the executive report video.
You sure you're recording?
Yes, sir.
All right.
But I'm going to. Yep, share the screen.
So this is the third installment of our 25th anniversary series. Now that we were able to offer the K-12 option, this opened the door for us to expand our brand offerings. Being responsive to the communities is one of the core values we have, and we even changed our name to Responsive Ed at that point. It would convey what we really are about, which is we're there to serve communities and a responsiveness to the student. So as we opened the Vista Academy of Hickory Creek, we had parents that had the same interest for quality education. So we actually opened a different model that was not direct teach. It was built more like our Premier model where it was around mastery based, and we integrated it for K-8 populations. And that is now the foundation across all of our quests and across all of our iSchool brands. With iSchool Virtual Academy, we were doing virtual 10 years prior to anyone else doing it. The state of Texas asked us would we take over a failing operator at the time that was running a virtual program. We took that program with a couple of hundred kids, and it has expanded to thousands of kids today and is one of the best virtual programs in the country. With our Ignite Community Schools, we saw a great need in underserved communities. We knew we had to create a program that was built around students being behind and needing more help to overcome some of the deficits they had had through other educational offerings they had been a part of. And opening our first Founders Classical Academy, we saw such a passion from parents around curriculum that was rich in Western civilization and in moral formation of kids. It's really the largest offering we have.
I learned about Responsive Ed when I was working in the governor's office. I learned about the work they were doing with Premier High Schools and dropout recovery. From there, I went to the Texas Education Agency where I served as the chief of staff. I learned about just how unique Responsive Ed is in the charter school space. There is no one else out there doing what this organization is doing. The thing that is most unique about Responsive Ed is that we don't provide just one education option for students. We're willing to look at a community, a student even individually, and say, what does this person need to be successful? And give these students a chance to change the trajectory of their lives. And across the board at Responsive Ed, we're getting character-based education that leads to the development of virtuous citizens. And we feel like by giving you the opportunity to earn an education with this value-based education, we're setting you up for success. We're giving you the hope of a brighter future. And we're frankly giving our country the opportunity to continue to excel.
I graduated from Founders Classical Academy of Louisville in 2020, and I look back on my time at Founders and I'm especially grateful for the time and the energy and effort that my teachers and my coaches took to instill in my peers and I a love and appreciation for virtues. Now as the Corps Commander at Texas A&M and the Corps of Cadets, I'm very grateful for my time at Founders Classical Academy and the strong foundation that it laid out for me, and I know it'll serve me well as I continue on after graduation to pursue a career in the Marine Corps.
I went to iSchool Virtual Academy for 7 years. It taught me how to be organized, manage my work, and on top of that, be disciplined.
In doing this type of system, there is a level of accountability and expectation because they are kind of on their own, and it sets them up for success and getting them ready for college.
Having the values, having the beliefs itself, as well as the education, it was a must. It was hands down of yes, you guys are the school for him to attend.
It's been a great journey to see him grow into the young man he has grown into be.
I'm excited about graduating today and starting the next chapter of my life.
We're excited that we've been able to reach so many different communities and do it while we're providing hope for students and instill moral excellence in those students. This is what makes Responsive Ed unique in the education space.
Is that auditorium that they were walking across, is that one of our schools or was it?
University of Texas, Arlington
Arlington.
College. So board members, thank you again for what y'all do and thank you for governing and leading the organization to be able to offer these different options and brands to communities across Texas and Arkansas. And Aaron and team, thank you guys for the nice videos. Very professional. Thank you all.
Right, we good? Right, and just to confirm that there's nobody here for public comment?
No.
Okay. Thanks. So then the next item on the agenda is consent items. Are there any changes to the consent items?
No, sir.
Right. So do I hear a motion to approve consent items D on the agenda 1 through 7? Don't be shy.
So moved.
Second?
I second.
Anybody object? No, consent items pass unanimously. And now we're on to one of our favorite times of year. Budget and the training that goes with it.
It's everyone's favorite time of year. Now, I sincerely appreciate your time today. I have 2 topics. Number 1 is training. Number 2 is the actual budget itself. So I understand this is not the most riveting content in the world. However, I'm going to try and bring it to life a little bit with some statistics about our organization. And, I was a board member. Some of this information I would have liked to have known at the time. So anyway, we're going to go through training. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Okay, so this does count towards your instructional hours. Just note that. So our agenda, we're going to talk through some resources that are available, some elements of public school finance as it relates to our revenue, our accounting code structure, and also our budgeting process. So resources, note I was unfamiliar when I was a board member just how much is actually on the TEA website. If you spend some time looking at it, there's a lot of financial information that relates specifically to our charter, and we can look at other charters as well. There, like Charter First, I've presented that about the financial integrity rating system of Texas, and also academic and demographic information relating to our district and other districts as well. So just note that that's out there. What I'm about to present is specifically from the Financial Accountability System Resource Guide, or FASREG. It's about 814 pages, so would be glad to flip through that with you if anyone would so enjoy doing so. But 2 elements specifically related to the Module 2, which is for charter schools. Note the financial information that we produce and the budget is based on generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, which might be very similar to organizations that you've been involved with in the past. And also note, every year we're required to do an annual audit, and that fund will come later this year. So there's lots of resources available if anyone wants to dig deeper.
Yeah, on the audit, what, remind me, is that the period after the end of the fiscal year? And that's when do they start that before? Or just after?
The audit specifically, so our fiscal year ends June 30th, so we're almost done. And I will be presenting the audit to you the November timeframe-ish of this year. I think that's about right. Is that Corey, I'm looking at you? Yeah.
Right, thank you.
But the auditors will really, they start their work in July.
That's correct.
After the.
Okay, elements of public school finance. Basically, this is where our revenue comes from the state. There is a foundation school program from the TEA, which the majority of our revenue comes from. Just note there is a difference between the revenue we receive from our brick and mortar campuses. It's based on average daily attendance, or ADA. You might hear that acronym a lot. So basically, if a student is in attendance in a specific school day, we get funding for that day. If they are absent for illness or any other reason, we do not get funding for our brick and mortar campuses per our state funds per TEA. Our virtual business is a little bit differently. It's paid for by completions. So we could have a student who quote unquote attends the program throughout the semester. If they don't complete the program, we get no funding on our virtual business. So it's a little bit different. There's a nuance to that. And I wanted to make sure everyone understood that.
Is the base allotment the same?
The base allotment is the same. And there is additional funding, that 66,000 that you're referencing. Our average funding per ADA is a lot more than the 6,000 because the next bullet point up there, we have CTE and we have special education and we have compensatory education. So our average funding per student is usually over $10,000. Premier High School tends to be higher than TCPA just because of the makeup of the students within that charter, because of the additional funding received. And at the same time, our brick and mortar campuses tend to have higher average funding than our virtual campuses, once again, because of the relative proportion of, special ed and CTE and comp ed and those things.
Gotcha.
So that's where we receive about 80% of our funding is from the state through this program. All right, this is just kind of a picture of how we're notified of said state funding. We get a summary finance report where we send our student data to TEA. They crunch the numbers and they let us know throughout the year and even after the year what our anticipated funding is. Interestingly enough, for the fiscal 23 year, which ended June 23, we got yet another notification. I think it was our 35th related to that year this week. Now, practically speaking, the numbers don't change much, but it's just interesting to note that they do change. So that's something we need to continue to stay on top of and mindful of as we manage our business, because it is somewhat of a moving target throughout the year and even after the year, depending on the population of our students. Once again, the proportion of special ed and comp ed and those things. Okay, now it gets really fun. So our accounting code structure, when I started full-time with responsive ed, I must admit, when I saw this, it was like, wow, this is a lot. But I have grown to really appreciate all of the information that can be gleaned from this coding string, which encompasses 10 data elements and 24 characters. This is uniformly used by all charter schools, so we're no different. There are some elements of this coding string that are denoted by that object, that icon you see, that are required by TEA. There are others that we can use at our discretion, and we do so. If you look at the right-hand side of this slide, just talk very briefly through these elements, and the ones that are specifically required by TEA will go into more detail in the following slides. So first of all, we have a fund code, which is 3 digits. It defines the source of the funds. Typically speaking, we have some local sources. We have state funds, which is about 80%. And then we also have funds from the federal government. And we use that fund code to keep track of where the funding comes from. The next element is the type, or R&E, revenue or expense, for our statement of activities. Function is going to be incredibly important for this board. It defines basically the purpose of the funding. And when I ask you to please approve the 2025 budget, you will be asked to approve it by function. It is actually the purpose of the spending, which differs from the object code, which is the detailed classification. And I like to think about it as the what. So for example, the function might be for purposes of instruction. The object code might be for travel or salaries or depreciation. So those are different, but they're both useful and meaningful. Sub-object is 2 digits. That's how we on the team separate our various charters. So for example, TCPA is 01, PHS is 02, and we can produce financial statements accordingly using that sub-object. The organization code is 3 digits, primarily used as the campus number, so we can produce a surplus deficit by campus, which is important to manage the business. Year is 1 digit. Some of our federal grants span more than 1 year, and to be able to track that appropriately, we use that code. The program intent code or PIC code is very important. It allows us to track revenue and expenses by some of those special populations like special education, CTE, and we'll talk about that more momentarily. Department is a 3-digit code we use to identify who controls that specific budget. So for example, our facilities team has a defined department code, and all of our janitorial expenses, our maintenance expenses, our landscaping expenses go to that code, and that enables that team to manage those specific items that are related to their area of control. And then finally, activity is user defined, and that allows us to get really specific so we can track things like athletics and boys athletics and girls athletics and yearbook club. There are lots of activity codes, and we use them to get really, really, really granular. So I know that was a bit of detail there, but I hope you can see that we've got a lot of ability to track in all kinds of ways, which helps us to do what we do. All right, moving specifically to try and bring it alive, the next 5 slides are going to be the 5 elements of our accounting string that are required by TEA, the first being the fund code. In the box, I'm not going to read it, but that's the formal definition from FASREG, what's defined on the TEA website. But we really have 3 types of funds, fund groupings, local, state, and federal. About 80% of all of our funding, or for the fiscal 23 year, 218 million comes from the state. So state funding is the majority. We do receive monthly installments based on that summary of finance. So once again, we submit our student data to TEA. They crunch the numbers, they provide us a summary of finance, and they send us monthly installments to enable us to run our business. Federal funds are a bit different. We apply for federal grants. When we receive a grant, they send us what we call a notice of grant award, or NOGA. That keys us to know that we can spend those funds and they are reimbursable, meaning we prove to the government that we've spent the funds and they reimburse us accordingly. Note that these are typically supplemental to state funds, that they're for a specific purpose based on what's identified in the grant, and they supplement what the state gives us for that reason. And you can see in that bullet, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Title I. You probably heard the term ESSER during the coronavirus times. Those are all federal grants that we track and where we receive. It was about $36 million in fiscal year 2023. So we used fund code to track where our funds come from. Thank you. You're good. Next one is function code. Once again, this is the purpose of the funds. You'll notice at the bottom of the slide, the total expenses for fiscal year 23 was 271 million. This is one way to cut those expenses. And once again, this is how I'm going to please ask you to approve our budget by function. We don't necessarily, to be transparent, run our business by function, because as you can see, function 11 is our biggest one by far. That's instruction. There's just a lot of dollars that go there. But I mean, clearly as an organization, we want to make sure that we're spending sufficient funds on instruction, and that might encompass teacher salaries, supplies directly related to the students. That 146 million goes to function 11 for the purpose of instruction. I'll just speak about a few others that are highlighted, the bigger ones. School leadership has salaries for principals and office staff. And then function 51, like plant maintenance and ops, 28 million. As you might imagine, that is for landscaping and maintenance and repair. So once again, this is a cut of the expenses by purpose, which we track by function code, and it totals for that year $271 million. Hopefully that makes some sense. The next slide, it's the same $271 million carved a different way using that accounting string. This is object code. This is typically how we manage the business when we forecast. We forecast by object code. I like to think of it as the what. There's about 84 of them that we use, broken out into 6 categories. Payroll, as you might imagine, is the majority of our expense, about 59% in the year. That's, we're a people business. That's what we do. The 6100 series, like for example, 6119, it would be a number that we would use for, salaried payroll. We have salaries, health insurance, Texas retirement system, Medicare. Those are all expenses that would go into 6100 series of the object codes which delineate payroll. Professional and contracted services are the 6200 series. In the fiscal year, we spent 43 million, or about 16%. Rent, utilities, maintenance, janitorial, outsourced labor. Once again, this is a summary. There's about 84 of them. Supplies and materials is the 6300 series of object codes where we track supplies, food, curriculum, and technology. Other is about 19 million in the year, or 7% of our spend. Some things like depreciation, travel, marketing belong there. Debt service, as you might imagine, has our interest expense. That's the 6500s. And other is where we put the CMO fee as defined by the agreement with Blue Learning. So once again, it's the same 271 million, just split a different way. It's how we manage the business. The majority of the expenses and payroll. Good. All right, the next is org code. This is required by TEA. It's the same, for example, 271 million split a different way. Every campus that we have has an org code. When we publish financial results on a monthly basis, we provide the superintendents the surplus deficit by org or campus. Every campus has a number, so they can see and manage their campuses accordingly. So if there's a campus that has a deficit, meaning their expenses are more than their revenue, which is not what they want, that provides them the insight to be able to work with that campus director to evaluate what it is they're doing and look for ways to increase revenue or optimize expenses. Each charter has an overall org code that we use for campuses that aren't specifically related, for expenses that aren't specifically related to a campus. And at the end of the day, we do publish, once again, forecasting, budgeting by org code, because it's a way we kind of run the business. And then program intent code, I mentioned before, it's called PIC code. It's 2 digits. This is what measures the funding and the expenses we have for some of those special student groups. And I'll talk about a few of them. Career and technical education. 22 is the PIC code. We spent 2.3 million in the 23 fiscal year. You know, we do have a pretty extensive program with phlebotomy and certified medical assistant, drone pilots, welding, building and coding, graphic arts, electric. We do get funding from the state for those programs. We are required to spend 55% of the funding they give us specifically on those direct costs, meaning teachers that teach CTE, supplies used for CTE. The other 45% we can use for, I'll call it indirect costs, like the salary of the leader of the CTE program and like lease or utilities. But once again, we're required to spend 55% on direct costs. Special education is the PIC code that has the most dollars, about 14 million that we spent in the fiscal year. We do have a 55% spend requirement, although we typically spend significantly higher than that. Given the nature of, those students, they do require, and we do provide, a lot of resources, and the state does provide those, and that's who we spend it on, and the PIC code is how we track that. Compensatory education, we do receive funds for students that are educationally disadvantaged and are at risk of dropping out. So in order to supplement their learning, we receive what we call comp ed funds. And you can read the others, I'm not going to go through them, but once again, we do receive funding for our special student populations, and we do have spend requirements for those groups. And we track that via the PIC code. Makes some sense, hopefully? All right, awesome. Last training slide is on the budget process. This comes from FASREG and is a good transition when we talk about the formal budget. So the governing body of the charter school, you fine folks, must adopt the budget prior to the start of the fiscal year, please. So that's why we're going to ask you momentarily to do so. It must be itemized by function, once again, by purpose. And the minutes of the board meeting must be used to record adoption of and amendments to the budget. So thank you for that. Unless we have any questions, that concludes training. Okay.
Good job, Joe. Thank you, Joe. You figured out the industry quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to move into this specific budget for 25 that the team has come up with. The agenda, if you'll allow me 45 seconds to do so, I would really like to introduce the budget team. On your right is Corey Fisher. A lot of you know him. He's been around for 7 years and brings a lot of responsive ed experience. New to the team, Ken Hanneman in the middle. He's been here for a few months. I worked with him for over a decade in a prior life, so happy to have him on the team. And then on your left is Shadaria Mallory. She has been with us about a year. She has extensive charter experience. She worked at the Educational Service Center, and she's my budgeting hero. So she did a lot of the blocking and tackling of the work that you're about to see. So special thanks to Shadaria.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we're going to talk to the supplement budget document that you have in your hand, provide some historical context, go through the process, major assumptions, the statement of activities, and we're going to end by please asking you to approve the budget by function. Okay, so the document you have in your hand, it's also on your board folders, is this overview presentation that we're reviewing today. There is a one-page recap of the surplus deficit, the expenses by function, which we're going to please ask you to approve. But there's also the budget by charter, by object code, which is how we manage the business. And we've further broken it out between brick and mortar and virtual. I know there's a lot of information there, but hopefully that's sufficient for review, and be happy to answer any questions over any materials that you have. So to give you some historical context where we are, we ended the fiscal year 23, ending June 23 with a slight deficit. That's clearly not where we want to be. We want to have a reasonable surplus. We were coming out of COVID times, and we made sure that we were staffed appropriately to be able to navigate some of the learning losses. During that time, it was difficult. Fiscal year 24 ends in 9 days. Don't want to go on record putting a number on a page, but we do forecast, I do think we're going to have a surplus in the mid-single digit millions. So we're happy to be on the positive side once again of that line. We have improved payroll costs this year. Once again, coming out of COVID times, we were able to optimize that a little bit. And I want to give a special recognition to our virtual teams. And the training, you might remember, were paid based on completions, while the virtual teams had historically strong performance in those completions, which generated some extra funding to help enable that surplus. So once again, I think we're going to be on the good side, mid-single digit millions. Okay, the process for the budget, a lot of work went into what goes on one simple slide, but just to hopefully give you an idea of what's been done. It was a bottom-up build. I know that's jargon, but basically that connotates. It was detailed from all the individual puzzle pieces that we added together to get to the budget that we're about to hopefully approve, as opposed to a top-down approach is where we decide on a target and divvy it up. Just want to make sure that the board is aware that there are the individual pieces to make the overall number are there. I do want to give thanks to all the department owners within Responsive Ed who provided the budget information for their areas of control. So we provided those individuals with a tool that had all the salaries for their teams, as well as historical context for their spending by object code. We got their feedback via that template, and that's what we used to kind of compile our budget. So we did solicit feedback from the relevant stakeholders, like our facilities team for landscaping and maintenance and repair, because once again, they're familiar with those areas of the business. For those items that did not directly relate to a specific department, like utilities and rent and interest, the finance team did that work. For utilities, we looked, over the last 3 years by campus to estimate what utilities might be for the coming year. We know what rent is by campus, so there's some science put into that. As I mentioned before, during training time, the majority of our expenses are in payroll, and about, roughly 60% or about 59. We started with the actual head count that we have throughout the organization by department and by campus. So that was the starting point. We did benchmark that for our campuses. For example, we looked at the salaries expended per full-time equivalent and the students taught, per full-time equivalent. And we did make some modifications. In the case of there's a campus that might be inefficient, we could have tweaked that. At the same time, if there was a campus that was overly efficient, we could have added resources. It was both ways. It was not just one way. And once again, we did involve the superintendents, and they signed off on that. And just want to reiterate, payroll is the majority of our expenses, and we spent some time there. And then finally, the review process, the team that's in front of you, we spent a lot of time going through the budget by fund, by function, by object, comparing to this year. And we identified things that were missing, like, at the same time, we identified expenses that were like, well, that seems like, that's a little bit more than we would have projected. We went and talked to those department owners. So we did sharpen the pencil based on the feedback. We just did not take what the department owners gave us. There was some diligence put into that. And the superintendents of the brands, they looked at the surplus deficit by campus as a reasonableness check. And Chuck, James, and Robert, these fine folks, spent a fun-filled 2 days with me going through it as well at a high level. So there was some review put into it. And so there's some diligence there. It was iterative, and there's a lot of review. All right, major assumptions, because I'm about to just flash what the results are. I want to make sure you understand the drivers behind the numbers. Per the training, as you know, ADA, average daily attendance, is what drives our funding. We are assuming ADA of roughly 500 more next year compared to this year. The breakdown is as follows, and I'll go through it quickly. We are closing some campuses. As a board, you're aware, we will lose about 600 ADA. Those campuses were struggling, but net, there was a deficit there. Mature campuses are mostly in line with prior year. Our marketing team is working very diligently to try and increase ADA. But at the same time, if you look at the data historically, for the last few years, we've been flattish. And we took I'll call it the conservative, realistic approach of relatively flat ADA for those campuses that are mature, which once again, can be considered a realistic assumption and not overly aggressive. We do think we're going to grow by a couple hundred because we do have some campuses that are expanding grades, adding an 11th grade where we know we're going to have additional students. We do have a new initiative in our Premier High School. It's called Optional Flexible School Day. There's a lot of churn within Premier, and we have what we think will enable us to maintain some of those students that are unable to continue their education with Premier because they can't attend on a as consistent basis as required. So this new initiative we think is going to help with our ADA. We are rebranding the campus next door to Founders, which that brand is more recognized and has sister campuses have a wait list. That campus has struggled from an ADA perspective, and we're taking action to hopefully rectify that. And at the same time, we're increasing ADA with pre-kindergarten. Anthony and Edward spoke to this group, I believe it was a few board meetings ago. And because of that, we think we're going to grow our ADA accordingly. So that's
Can I
ADA.
just ask a
Please,
question?
always.
Maybe, and not really to you,
Yeah.
but for the next meeting, can we kind of talk about what we're doing to, increase the ADA or from a marketing perspective? Is that?
Yes, we can do a presentation on what we're doing with marketing to increase ADA.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay, moving on, virtual completion rates. We're assuming a more longer term view of those completion rates. As I mentioned before, this year, completion rates came out materially stronger than a longer term view. Last year was stronger as well. So once again, this might be hopefully, it is a more conservative approach than taking what we've experienced over the last few years, where those virtual completion rates have been 10 percentage points higher than what's shown on this page. A big assumption, no material change in revenue per ADA. We're not anticipating any increased funding from the state. That's the industry intelligence we're getting. And so we're not baking any increase in funding. We are assuming inflation in wages and other costs. I think everyone is familiar, inflation is not zero. So everything like for wages, we're assuming roughly 2% growth. Health insurance, is double-digit growth. So we have assumptions for each of those, but we are assuming inflation. A big assumption is security. We have $6 million in the budget. The summary there is we have provided funding for each campus to have a marshal or external security. So that is provided for in the budget. And the last item to note is we do have $4 million in contingency, or dollars that are not earmarked for opportunities that we have not yet defined, items that we have not considered, and or just in case ADA doesn't come up to where we anticipated it should be. So we do have some contingency there just in case. Good?
Yeah.
Okay, want to remind everyone of our admin fees because they're not insignificant, although they're essentially unchanged from current year. Of our state revenues, we do pay 8.5% to Blue Learning under the CMO contract. And we do pay the 501c3. I say the PHS and TCPA pays the 501c3 a percentage of their revenue for admin support. You might ask, why is brick and mortar for TCPA less than PHS? It's because those campuses are about 4 times the size and there are some economies of scale there. Gotcha. So that's just the one. Those are different. Okay, without further ado, I know there's a lot of numbers on this page, but these are the results of the budget. You have the detail in front of you, and these numbers reflect the assumptions that I just described. For the state funds that we budget for the board, we're anticipating revenue of about 268 million. The related expenses are about 263 million. So if you look at the bottom right of the slide, we are budgeting for a $5.3 million surplus, which is somewhat in line with where we anticipate we will finish this fiscal year. I do want to let you know those numbers do include those contingency funds. Those are baked in. And when you look at it by charter, TCPA, Texas College Preparatory Academies, the surplus is 1.7, and Premier High School, it's 4.9. We do have a deficit of 1.3 million at the 501c3. That's not out of line with history, but it's something that we acknowledge and are focused on in the coming year. But once again, overall for Responsive Ed Texas, a $5.3 million surplus is what we are budgeting. The last few numbers I just want to draw your attention to. Overall expenses for TCPA are about 172 million, and Premier High School is about 78 million, which those numbers are going to be identical on the next slide. And I'm going to ask you to please approve the budget by function as required by TEA. Make some sense, hopefully? All right, last slide. Here is the 2025 budget expenses by function for which board approval is please required. You will notice the 172 million for TCPA and the 78 million for Premier High School is identical to the numbers on the previous slide, which rolls up to the over $5 million surplus. You can see it broken out by function code. You know, instruction continues to be the largest by far, as we learned in the board training. But at the end of the day, thank you for your attention. Be glad to take any questions and appreciate your consideration in improving this budget as presented.
Thank you, Joe. Very thorough. Appreciate it. Thank you, team, for putting this together. A lot of work went into this, I know. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
I do, but could you just point me to the balance sheet so I can figure it out? I can answer my own question. I just want to.
Balance sheet's not in this notebook. We can get you a copy of it.
Okay.
The balance sheet. It's usually in the board folder, but it's not this month. Financials.
Is there a specific question you have? We've got
Cash.
broad. Our cash position remains around $100 million, you know, give or take. You know, we get one payment from TEA throughout every month. So what tends to happen is, you know, we tend to dip below 100, and then once we get the payment,
25th of the month, it goes back up. Which
Yeah.
when we get it, that's 100 across both charters and the 501c3. 501c3 will end the year at about 4 million cash, I think, to cover these deficits we're going into this next year. I think that's what I
closer
heard.
to 3, but yes,
3 million.
that's accurate.
Right, and then is it a 90-day operating requirement?
What's required is it 90?
90 or 120?
90? 90 is gold.
Okay. Right.
Required is 60-ish, and then 90 is gold standard.
Okay, and then is it, this might get in the weeds a little bit, is it still at Independent Bank?
It is.
And they're still backing it, you see what the collateral is that they're
We
backing
can.
with? Okay. Okay, right, thanks.
Thank you.
So if you don't have any other questions, we're asking for approval of the budget for the 23-24 school year by function.
I don't have any questions. Yeah. Right, I'll make a motion to pass the budget that's presented by Joe and the CFO in the finance department. Approve it by function. Do I hear a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously.
All right. thank
Anything
you.
else? No? Right,
Thank you.
thank you. All right. So we've got a couple of separate items. First one is consider approving, which we did, right?
Yes, sir.
Budget. Consider improving construction for the new building in Leander. Is Robert or Lynn?
Lynn's going to move up here to be closer to us, and then Robert is going to present this item.
He seems excited about it.
Just time management, we're doing good. But I would say, Robert, we have maybe 10 minutes on the Leander. And then
All
we'll
right.
go into
It
closed
shouldn't
session.
take that long.
We are ending at noon today. That's the plan.
And it's not me this time that's pushing.
We will talk slower. As soon as we get the PowerPoint.
Everybody knows Lynn.
All right, so if it's got control of it now here, I guess. Yeah, all right. Okay, Leander, we're asking for approval from the board today to do some expansion at the Leander site. Leander, if you don't know where Leander is, it is about 30 miles northwest of Austin, suburb of Austin. The Leander over the last 13, 14 years, I'm going to do a historical look back here in a second, but over the last 13, 14 years, the population growth there has increased quite a bit, more than double. So you can see from 2010, it was about 40,000 population growth up to a little bit under 90,000 people there in Leander. So I'm going to take a quick look back just to give you kind of a historical look back of what the board's approved in the past. In 2013, Responsive Ed purchased 14 acres with 2 buildings that were existing there for $3.5 million. You can see in the 2 buildings there, one was about 12,470 square feet. The other was 19,642 square feet. So those were the 2 buildings when we purchased the property that were there. In 2014, we decided to add a 34,000 square foot building. You can see up at the top left of that screen. It was at a cost of about $5 million. We invested in that 3rd building, which contains 10 classrooms, library, cafeteria. Middle school and high school students is the population that uses that building. So the next thing we want to talk about is why are we looking at expansion there is they have a pretty significant wait list. And, the demand for that campus in Leander, they have held pretty steady at about 680 kids the last 3 years. As you can see, they have right now holding at about 700, a little less than 750 kiddos on the waiting list there at Leander. The next slide will show us what this is a rendering to kind of show us what we're wanting to build. You can see building 3 up at the top, but highlighted in red there is we're proposing to add an additional 22,150 square foot building. The new facility will be constructed right behind the 2 original buildings and kind of create a courtyard and right there behind where those 2 existing buildings are as a part of the total plan. Here you can see it from a site plan overview of where the new building will kind of sit and be attached right there behind the 2 original buildings.
So is the detention pond something you put the bad kids in? I mean, sorry. That's
Probably not. Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in detention, I guess.
So that's the site plan, and then we can kind of show you what the floor plan is going to look like a little bit there too as well. There's 13 classrooms, multi-purpose exercise area, science lab, art studio. We'll be adding sped and adding a secured vestibule and a teacher break room to this addition of the campus. So I wanted to quickly just run through what are the breakout costs for this expansion. We've broken this out by the actual construction of the 22,150 square foot building would be 5.6 million. We have to do some updates to the existing buildings with the fire alarm, civil site work. There's new parking, new driveways, utility relocations, demolition of the canopies, detention pod and things like that. We need to get all of that work done that's out, not a part of the actual construction of the building that's around the building, what I call infrastructure. So there's about 1.8 million expense with that. The next slide here shows that we have budgeted 1.1 million for improvements to flooring, ceiling tiles, reconfiguring some of the rooms in the current buildings that we had to build out that secure vestibule and some other ancillary spaces, mechanical, electrical modifications that we're going to have to do in some of those reconfigured rooms, paint, new fire sprinklers, things like that. The two older buildings that we're also asking for as a part of this package today need some of these updates because, they're, pretty good, pretty old buildings. So we're asking for some updates in that. The 370,000 includes the facade upgrade at the front of the building. And then also we need to do a roof replacement for building 2 and the gymnasium as well. So, man, why is this thing not working? All right, there we go. So what we're requesting in total today for board approval is the $10 million. We do have the funds in the 2021 bond. So the board already approved the 2021 bond, back in 2021. So we had funds reserved in there for the Round Rock site that we decided to sell. So we're going to be utilizing those funds. We're just moving those funds. This property was Tefford at the time. It was Tefford. So we can reallocate the funds that we were going to use for Round Rock over to Leander. So with that, I'd turn it back to you guys for a motion to approve the 10 million on the construction and the remodel of the current buildings.
And this will put the Leander School on par with the other Foundry schools like Prosper, Frisco, where they can serve up to close to 1,000 kids. Is
It
that
will
right?
be up to 1,000, yes, sir.
So it'll be similar to what we have in the Dallas Metroplex.
And the facade will have the branding kind of look like the others. Close to it anyways.
As much as we can, because the buildings are totally different.
Different,
So
yeah.
we're gonna upgrade the facade on building 1 because it's basically a metal building at this point. So we're gonna put some cementitious type panels on the outside, make it look like the others.
Okay.
And signage.
Good.
So we're asking for approval for $10 million to be spent on this project in Leander.
So I was just maybe struggling a little bit with the math, so I saw 2.370 in the,
Sarah, can you go back and
Let me
open up the
see.
PowerPoint?
so 2.370 in the updates.
Yes, sir. You trying to get it back?
And then-
Go forward one.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back there too.
5.6.
5.6 on the actual building,
Building 1.8.
1.8 on the existing.
Okay.
I think it's just a little bit, I mean, we're hoping to come in just a little bit. I think maybe what you're seeing is it's just a little bit under 10 million.
Go to the next
The
slide.
total
That's
is just a slightly under 10 million. So,
7.4.
well, I keep
Next
pressing
slide.
in. Sarah, oh,
8.5, 9.5.
yeah, it's a couple 100,000 under.
Okay, so, but no land cost because we already own the land.
We already
Right.
own that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I mean, it's fairly significant. I don't know that we've done an enhancement of one location for this amount of money, have we?
Not this amount, because of inflation, but Louisville would be similar in that we bought a private school, we built a high school, then we built a middle school. So this is a second building like we did in Louisville.
In the population definitely will support. And the
Absolutely.
waiting list does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm. And it does include obviously the remodel of the two older buildings we originally purchased. So it's kind of part of the whole project, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody have any other questions?
Maybe I missed it, but the net, what's the net, how's the income gonna show up on this with the new students and what's the?
Yeah, that's one of those slides that we kind of want to see just, it's like
Just
new
spend the 10
students,
million.
cost,
Increase the student
revenue.
What's the net profit? What would that be?
So it's going to increase by about 350 students, so about 3.5 million new revenue that would come in on this project.
Economically, it definitely pays over not so long a period of.
Yeah,
time.
the total project cost, when you go back and add, if we were to have to build the entire project, it's definitely under in total cost, it's definitely under what it would cost at the
Building
20,
debt, if you build ten.
24, 25 million.
24 to 30.
So
million.
it's
This will end up being 10
it's
plus.
10 and the
original.
3.5 and the what was the
Like 17
was
million is
the-
what it'll be.
3.5 on the first, so 6, so 7, so
17
17 and a half
all in.
million all in, as opposed to 20, what we're running about, 24,
So
23, 24 if we built the entire building.
Yeah, I kind of
Our
forget what
project.
Flower Mound was with both locations. That difference is smaller, I think.
it seems like it got to 22, but I
Yeah.
don't know for sure.
No, I thought it was in the low 20s as
I
well.
think it was 22, yeah. So we overlooked getting you the slide we usually have, which is the spreadsheet that shows that, and we'll make sure you get that in the future. But it is because of the cost of the original investment and adding something on the land we already have, it will definitely put us in a better position on the expense side for facility costs on this location than some of the other ones we've opened in the last 7 years.
Yeah, sorry, and I do have one question, traffic. What's that gonna look like? Is that something? we need
It's
to address, or-
it's on a like a side road, and the reason for the
side.
infrastructure
Either,
improvements.
so,
Adding 300 kids.
yeah, adding
So-
300 kids in the.
So if
traffic
you'll
flow.
go back a couple of slides. if you
Where
could
you're
do
talking
that
about
to
where the
site plan,
traffic flow,
to the
you
site
want to go to
plan.
the traffic flow? Let me go back a couple slides.
Well, you can pass the traffic flow, traffic can come in the same way, but now you'll be able to drive around this building, so I have a lot more stacking than we had before.
Yeah, you
Okay.
currently cannot do that, right?
Flower Mound was about 24 with land.
Well, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. Right, so you're just looking for a vote to approve
Yes, sir.
the 10 million, the construction costs
Right.
and, well, construction costs, which would include the enhancements. So, do I hear a motion to approve, the construction costs as just outlined to us for the Leander location?
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Right. All in favor, say aye.
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 The motion to approve passes unanimously. All right. Thank you. So I think we got to go into closed session.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Len.
Pursuant to section 551.076, 551.089, and 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, we are authorized to go into closed session. No votes will be taken until we reconvene in open session. Sorry, guys, just say. Okay, we are coming out of closed session and the meeting is now calling it back to order, an open session. And the quorum is still present. And we have one motion to present and vote on in open session that from our closed session discussions. And I will make a motion to approve the outcome discussed by Mr. Cook during our closed session. And I ask for a second.
Second.
Thank you, Lisa. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Are you voting or are you abstaining? You're
I
voting.
think
You can vote. Okay. The motion passes unanimously. And we have no other matters before the board. Okay. And we're adjourned. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, guys. Today, we are going to have Mediterranean food if you have time to stay.
Nice.
When's our